Would it surprise you to hear that you can smoke on a tanker, despite the massive sign towering over the ship telling you otherwise? I mean, it really is massive, and it's placed prominently at the forward end of the accommodation block. You could probably see it from maybe a mile in front of the ship, but that's the key. It's visible from ahead, go just behind the sign, and you can't actually see it at all. It's not beyond the realms of possibility to find the ship's smoking room right next to its massive no smoking sign. So, if it isn't a literal instruction to everyone on board, why is it even there? Well, if we look carefully at the sign's location, we find the first clue. The forward end of the accommodation block on a tanker acts as a separation between the two main zones. You have the safe zone, which is after the separation and where all the crew live, and you have the dangerous zone, forward of the separation. The idea is that there is the potential for dangerous gases to exist in the danger zone because it's just above the cargo tanks. By splitting the ship into two zones, theoretically, you keep the crew safer. Notice how there are no opening windows on the front of the accommodation, and the doors on the sides all have hinges at their forward end, so the air naturally flows away from the opening. That also makes it safer to open them when the ship is moving ahead, but for this video, it's just to keep the dangerous gases out. You might also find that the accommodation block is pressurised, meaning that air can flow out, but potentially explosive gases can't get in. As a result, it means that in the safe zone, naked flames are much less likely to cause an explosion than they are in the dangerous zone. Of course, that still doesn't mean that you can smoke or indeed have barbecues, gas rings and other sources of ignition just anywhere in the zone. Although the risk of igniting the cargo is reduced, there is still the risk of causing a fire on the ship, effectively starting a chain of events that could ignite the cargo. For this reason, smoking is permitted, but only within designated areas within the safe zone. Only safety matches, so not lighters, are allowed, and cigarettes need to be disposed of in self-extinguishing ashtrays. The same sort of thing applies to other potentially naked flames, heat sources in the galley and the engine workshop for example. Rather than gas, you'll usually find some sort of hot plate instead. Although it's all within the safe zone, so you can have sources of ignition, you still want to minimise the overall risk of fire on the vessel. But that leads us to the question. If we're taking all of these precautions in the safe zone, why is it that smoking is the only activity banned in the dangerous zone? Well, actually it's not. There are loads of other precautions you need to take. For example, one of the main ones is restrictions on electronic devices. Think about it. Any electronic device can and often does cause sparks and generate heat. Those are sources of ignition in the exact same way that a cigarette is a source of ignition. Inside any electronic device, say a radio, mobile phone or even a calculator, you'll have lots of small electronic components. Between those components are small gaps which could lead to sparks. And individually, each component could generate heat, so you also need to have controls in place to restrict that. Let's think about a simple switch for example. As two metal contacts get close to touching, a spark could jump between them. If there were explosive gases present, that spark could ignite the gases. So, you need to isolate the switch within an airtight enclosure so that no explosive gases can get to the spark. The same thing applies to entire circuit boards. You could get sparks between any of the components. Maybe a bit of dust gets inside and creates a path over which you get a spark and potentially a short circuit. Taken together, any electronic device is a potential source of ignition, unless it's been designed to be intrinsically safe. We're talking of isolation like we demonstrated with the ship, as well as precautions like the device being lower power than usual, all just to reduce the chance of it becoming a source of ignition. But what about the ship's equipment, winches, pumps, hand tools and things like that? They're not low powered and they seem to be okay running in the dangerous area. Well, actually they are still intrinsically safe. They've all been designed to minimise the risk of becoming a source of ignition. Hand tools, for example, are powered by compressed air instead of electricity. As for the ship's hardware, so winches and things, the parts in the dangerous area are well protected and isolated, and other parts like their power supply units are simply located behind the safety barrier where no explosive gases should be able to reach. So, we've discussed cigarettes, smoking and electronics, but what about one final component that crosses the safety barrier? The crew. You'd think that naturally people don't generate sparks, but actually with static electricity, they could. So, you'll find that crew members on tankers will make sure that they're not wearing gloves when they leave the accommodation block. The idea is that when they open the door or touch the handrails, they discharge any static electricity to ground through the vessel. They're then safe to put on their gloves, carry their intrinsically safe equipment and go to work on deck. If you work on a tanker, all this is second nature to you, but what about in port? Suddenly, it's not just the crew you need to worry about, it's anyone boarding or working near the vessel. And add into the mix that it's likely the ship will be conducting cargo transfer operations, increasing the risk of the escaping gases and an associated explosion. At these high-risk times, smoking areas will be closed completely, even in the safe zone, and galleys and workshops won't be allowed to work with naked flames. Suddenly, the no smoking sign becomes relevant across the entire vessel. You want anyone coming aboard to be aware, so placing a nice big sign for everyone to see is vital. Even if they're not actually on board, you want anyone in the vicinity to be aware. All it is a clear reminder of the danger in the area. On a tanker, the no smoking sign doesn't literally just mean no smoking for those with access to the vessel. It means that you're in the dangerous area, you should have received training, be carrying intrinsically safe devices, and taken static reduction precautions. For everyone else close by, you probably haven't received training, so the goal is just to eliminate the most likely source of ignition. Only for you, the no smoking sign literally means no smoking.